Good afternoon. Welcome. Thank you so much for being with us for this special Toronto Star event. My name is Jon Erlichman, and this is the Toronto Star Climate Change Virtual Event. And we're so glad to have you with us. This is an issue that is coming up more and more with Toronto Star readers. And today we're excited to dive deeper into this important subject, which impacts so many people, especially with the story of housing top of mind for so many of you. Over the course of this hour, we're going to hear from some experts in the field, and we're also going to be taking your questions. So we look forward to a very informative hour. I also want to take an opportunity now to introduce you to some of our speakers today who have impressive work throughout their career and are going to be helping to answer some of the big picture questions and also some of the practical ones. Joining us as part of this conversation today are Kathryn Bakos. Kathryn is Managing Director of Climate Finance and Resilience for the Intact Center of Climate Adaptation. She's done very influential work in the field and very much understands issues like flooding, how it impacts housing markets, and how to integrate climate risk into decision making. And also joining us, David Kellershohn. David is Associate Director of Engineering Services at the Toronto and Region Conservation Authority. And when the city is dealing with big flooding events, David is someone we often turn to and is working hard behind the scenes in advance of many events to protect your homes and critical infrastructure. We're grateful to have both of you with us for this conversation. I do want to take a quick minute to thank our sponsor for today's event, Intact, and so we really appreciate them supporting this conversation. And before we kick off our conversation with Kathryn and David, I did mention we want to hear from you as well. And for those participating, we're going to be taking, in the final 20 minutes of this dialogue, your questions. Some of you have already submitted some, which we appreciate. If you'd like to submit a question, it's very simple to do. There is a Q&A sidebar to the right of your screen, and you can pop it in there, and we'll be watching for those questions, and we can put those to Kathryn and David. With that said, I'd like to kick things off. And Kathryn, I'm going to start with you for our first segment here. We really just wanted to dive deeper into the subject of how serious a threat are climate-related damages. What are the facts telling us right now? And I'll start with Canada more broadly speaking. When we talk about increases in severe weather-related damage, how dramatic of an increase are we seeing right now?
Yeah, well, we are seeing an increase, and we know from authoritative bodies that these events are going to continue to get worse. We know across Canada that it is going to get hotter and wetter. So we're obviously going to end up focusing on Toronto as an example, and flooding is a very great risk across Toronto. So we know when temperatures get higher that adds more moisture to the atmosphere. With more moisture and more energy, we end up with more water being evaporated. And when precipitation water condenses and comes down in the form of precipitation, we end up with bigger storms, with more water falling over shorter periods of time. And the energy that went into evaporating that water in the first place, it doesn't disappear. It stays in the system. And so we're seeing storms come down with even greater force than ever before. So flooding is a very big issue across Canada. Of course, we're seeing other issues such as wildfire and extreme heat. But there are great costs that are associated with that as well.
That's what I also wanted to ask you about, just for people who are trying to think about these weather-related damages. What is the most expensive form of damage in reality as we deal with more of these different threats?
Yeah, I think it's really important to actually take a step back, and we can actually look to the insurance sector as a very good proxy for the growing risk in the system. Specifically, the property and casualty, the P&C insurance sector, they're very good at calculating after every extreme weather event what the costs are. And we can actually turn to what's called the catastrophic insurable loss claims data. So this is any event, a flood, wildfire, hailstorm, windstorm that triggers $30 million or more of insured losses. So yeah, if everyone can just take a look at this graph here, just to orientate everyone, on your x-axis, you have years. Cat losses in Canada started to be calculated in 1983, and we have updated numbers for 2024. Sorry, I hope I said 1983 to 2004. On your y-axis, you have billions of dollars worth of losses. And just so everyone's aware, this has been corrected for inflation and per capita wealth accumulation. So we are looking at a comparison of apples to apples year over year. Just to give a little bit of context, between 1983 to 2008, losses ranged from approximately $400 to $700 million per year. So that's what all insurance companies in Canada would expect to pay for extreme weather risk. Well, everything really started to change around 2009 onward, which is within that gray box region. And you can actually see this discernible upward trend in losses. Losses now average approximately $2.8 billion per year, with 15 out of the 16 of the last years being above $1 billion. Last year, 2024, losses reached $9.2 billion, ranking it the worst loss year in Canadian history. The Toronto flood of last year was originally estimated at $940 million, and that was recently corrected to approximately $990 million of insured losses. Now, we're just talking about insurance losses here, but we really have to recognize those aren't the only economic losses in the system. So the rule of thumb here in Canada is you take all of these amounts that you see here and you actually multiply them by 3 to 4 times. And what you get is uninsured losses. So just as an example, for 2024, 9.2 billion, that would be 27 to 36 billion dollars coming out of the pockets of individuals, businesses, and governments. For governments, that's money coming out of budgets for hospitals, schools, infrastructure development. So we have to think about the opportunity costs that are being lost. And Jon, just a little bit more specifically to your question before I end, in regards to, well, what are the costs that like individuals would be experiencing? So this graph is really impressive, because what we can actually start doing is isolating for the different types of extreme weather events that we experience across Canada on an annual basis. And what we know without fail across Canada, and this is specific for Toronto as well, is that flooding is the costliest extreme weather event. From an insurable perspective, that's flooding manifesting itself as flooded basements. And from an uninsurable perspective, that would be impacts to buildings, roads, and bridges, so major infrastructure. From an insurable homeowner perspective, the average cost of a flooded basement is $54,000. We currently know that 10% of the Canadian housing market is uninsurable for flood risk. So a homeowner who doesn't have flood insurance would be on the line for $54,000. And that's usually within a few days, because it's on average tends to be sewage water that is actually backed up into that home, not just water, it's sewage water. And Jon, I'm happy to explain what happens there. But you need that sewage water out of the home within 1 to 2 days, or the house becomes uninhabitable. We're also seeing mortgage providers such as Desjardins Financial. They've stopped offering mortgages in high-risk zones. So we're not just talking about the uninsurability, but the stability of the Canadian housing market.
So when I look at those numbers, which are startling, Kathryn, it almost takes me one step back. I mean, for those who are wondering why weather-related damage incidents are rising, I think everybody's curious about that. Where have we landed on the core reasons for what's going on right now?
So climate change is, of course, a driver in this system, but we do have to recognize it's not the only reason why costs are going up. We're seeing aging municipal infrastructure that never incorporated adaptation or climate projections into consideration. And we're also seeing across cities, specifically urban centers, the loss of things like natural infrastructure, wetlands, grasslands, and forested areas that help attenuate the effects of some extreme weather events. So just as an example, when we remove natural infrastructure, again, wetlands, grasslands, and forested areas, those natural spaces could act as sponges to help get water out of the system. When we replace it with things like cement, this is a non-absorbent material. And so what cement actually does is it directs water to the lowest possible place. So in Toronto last year, we saw the Don Valley Parkway flood out. And it also leads water into people's basements. So this is why we see a lot of basement flooding. But we have to recognize that retaining that natural infrastructure, it doesn't just help with flooding. In major urban centers, what we're also seeing is extreme heat events because urban areas, those paved over spaces, tend to also experience what's called the urban heat island effect. So this is where urban areas experience 10 to 15 degree higher temperatures than non-urban rural surrounding areas. And so
Wow.
by retaining that infrastructure like grasslands or tree canopy, we actually notice a reduce in ambient air temperature. And this could protect our most vulnerable, the elderly, those with pre-existing health conditions, pregnant women, those experiencing homelessness. So there are many co-benefits associated with retaining things such as natural infrastructure, including carbon sequestration, biodiversity preservation, and mental and physical health benefits that are associated with nature as well.
Right. That's really helpful context. And as we go through this conversation, we're also going to get to some practical things people can be thinking about in their own situation, especially when it comes to protecting their home. But clearly, you laid out a case there about the work that has to be done to protect the city itself and the homes in the city. And so I do want to bring David into the conversation as well, because obviously you live and breathe this. And so maybe you can just sort of outline what is already being done, given some of those issues that Kathryn outlined. I mean, billions of dollars are being spent. What can you tell us, David?
Thank you for asking. Definitely billions are being spent, and it's a tremendous amount of effort that's being put into it. But the catch is the problem is also quite large. There's a lot of people living with this risk. But I'm going to walk through a little bit the whole package of what's being done. So we have to look at the very early end in terms of not introducing new risk through all the planning regulations that the province and other levels of government have helped with. But then we can look at the City of Toronto, other levels of government as well, for funding these really large projects, these infrastructure projects. So in the City of Toronto, we have river improvement projects, but we also have urban drainage improvement projects that are quite significant. So we have one neighborhood in the city, Rockcliffe, that's about 1.4 billion. All the pieces with that. We have the Portlands, 2.5 billion when it's done, plus or minus. And we have the Basin Flooding Protection Program. They've already spent 1.1 billion since about 2008, 2009. So just to put that into context, that's building a Rogers Center once every 10 years is about $1 billion. So that's multiple Rogers Centers of that level of investment. So it's quite substantive.
Generalize too much because obviously every project that needs funding has its own specifics. But overall, the goal here is lower the risk of flooding. I mean, what are the key issues that have to be managed, tackled, etc.?
Yeah, so the key issues, we have to think about both public safety and property damage risk. And that's why there's this whole suite of solutions. There are sewer upgrades that the cities are doing. There's riverine flood infrastructure projects that the Toronto Region Conservation Authority are doing with the city. But there's also flood warning systems and monitoring systems. So the Toronto Region Conservation Authority issues flood messages, and we issued one today, a safety message, a warning of the rain that we have today. Well, the public can sign up for that. They can get that in real time, and they can look at monitors real time as well to understand the risk. So maybe move away from the risk, but also upgrading infrastructure is a significant component.
And I wonder if you can shed a bit of light on what have proven to be the areas most prone to flooding. You alluded to it a little bit earlier, but for any residents of the city or the surrounding area, I'm sure they'd be curious to know what are the problem spots for the city.
So there's quite a few, and that's what makes the problem such a challenge. So from a riverine perspective, we have identified 14 higher risk areas, call them flood vulnerable clusters associated with the rivers. But then also when we look at this map, you can see different levels of shading. There are different ways to identify flood risk, and this tries to show that it's quite distributed across the city. And if we look at some of the published works from the City of Toronto, they identify many, many streets that could use some improvement to get to that ideal level of service so people don't flood. Yep.
No, please continue.
Please continue. I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. You did talk a little bit about the Portlands project, a multi-billion-dollar project. Maybe we can spend a little bit of time going through some of the issues specifically that you've been navigating there.
Most definitely. So we look at the Portlands, it is a very large area. So when we think of the work that's being done down there, we call it sometimes the Portlands Precinct. It's 356 hectares. It's a very large area, and it's at the bottom end of the Don River. And what happened in this part of the city is back in the 1800s, we started filling the lake to create this industrial area. But the catch was when we did that, we really restricted the Don River. So it comes down, the city of Toronto comes towards Lake Ontario, and it doesn't have a great way to get into Lake Ontario. It goes through the Keating Channel today. So it's restricted. We restrict water, it backs up, it raises flood levels. And what that has resulted in is 250 hectares, 290 hectares of existing lands being in the floodplain, both on the west and east side of the Don River. So the Portlands project has a number of goals, but its primary function is flood protection. So they're building a new river and have built a new river channel through the Portlands area into Lake Ontario. And the public can go there today. So that opens up the river. With it being more open, water levels don't have to rise as much. But they also built in these big berms. I'll call them berms, the technical term, flood protection landforms. Really, really big mountainous pieces of earth that won't move during a flood. And those are on either side, ultimately will be either side of the Don River. And as the water comes up in the Don River, that protects the existing lands on the west and east side. And just to help describe the story a little bit, when the Conservation Authority thinks of flood protection, it thinks of the Hurricane Hazel event. So right now in the Don River, we have about 4 cubic meters flowing in the Don River. In July 24, that storm event where the Don Valley Parkway closed, we had about 250 cubic meters flowing down the river. So a lot of flow. But Hurricane Hazel that we design for and prepare for is 1,700 cubic meters. So the cars in July 24, they were still on the highway. People had to be rescued from them, but they were on the highway. Under Hurricane Hazel event, the cars are under preparing for.
And earlier in the conversation, Kathryn talked a little bit about the, as an example in the insurance industry, at what point does a certain situation, a certain area become uninsurable? Can you just walk us through maybe sort of the process of when you're trying to balance the needs and time between different areas, different projects, all in, well, not all, but in many cases requiring deep levels of investment? How does the city balance all of that?
That's a tremendous challenge. And a lot goes into that thought process. So one, we can try and look at which area is the most at risk. And we could say, with no other issues, let's do that one first. But it's really not that simple. So we do have to get into how complex it is to solve problems. And we also have to get into how much that benefit might be with those issues. And there's limitations on money. There's limitations on how much can be built at a time. The Portlands kind of brought together a whole bunch of ideas together. So it had the idea of making the Don River beautiful again, trying to get the water quality better, had the idea of reducing the flood levels. But then it also had this issue of housing shortages. And there's this area so close to downtown. What if we could put more housing there? And we can't when it's in a floodplain, but we can when it's not in a floodplain. And so tremendous housing opportunities come out of that. So all those pieces together create this gravity that allows some projects to move ahead before others.
And in a few minutes, we're going to get into you talked about housing. We'll get into a few more practical pieces of information for what homeowners themselves can do to protect their properties. But David, I guess for now, just sort of a final question, that marriage of people taking matters into their own hands to improve the safety of where they live, while the city itself is working to protect areas of housing and infrastructure. What is that relationship, in your opinion, between the individual and the community, the city, etc.?
So it's a really good question. So if I'm a homeowner and I'm looking at my house and I'm wondering what can I do aside from what the city does, it really comes down to a little bit of awareness of what's happening with your house. What chances might you have, and that might steer what you do. So you might look at the ground being wet around the house. Well, that might steer you to a certain solution so that you don't have water seeping in through your basement. You might look at the age of your house, the age of your infrastructure. Does it need renewal? Does it need some modern additions, such as sump pumps or backflow valves? These tools can really reduce the risk, regardless into. One, we want all the systems around us to work really well, but also on our own systems, our own house, we need to make sure they work well. And that does require some upgrading at times and some maintenance at times, but also real awareness.
Okay, that's really helpful context, and it leads us into the third part of our discussion. And Kathryn, I'm going to bring you back into it because I think this is going to be helpful in answering some of the questions. We're already getting some questions, by the way, folks. Thanks very much for submitting them to the Q&A portion of the screen here. You can just go to the tab there and send us a question, and in a few minutes we'll start taking some of those questions. But Kathryn, on the subject of what homeowners can do to protect their homes, I know there's obviously different weather events. We've been talking about flooding, we've referenced high winds, and more. But what are some things that people can start thinking about if they want to protect their homes, their communities?
Yeah, thanks, John. And it's at this point of conversations or presentations that I do that I could see in the audience, and I obviously can't see the audience today, but people seem very worried. And so what I always like to bring into my conversations is hope, that there are resources available to help homeowners, to David's point, to educate homeowners on what the risks are, but more importantly, what measures can we put into place to get risk out of the system. And this is where my team at the Intact Center on Climate Adaptation, this is really where we come into play. So we've worked with standard setting bodies such as the Standards Council of Canada, the Canadian Standards Association, and the National Research Council. And for every research report that we've put together, we've worked with on average 50 to 200 subject matter experts from across the country with relevant expertise to develop practical, meaningful, and cost-effective ways to reduce the key physical climate risks in Canada. So obviously for our conversation today, I'm just going to focus on flooding. But what we've developed and understood is what can we be doing at the level of our homes and communities, new and existing community design and coastal communities. So how should homes and communities be built and retrofitted? Commercial buildings, we notice in urban city centers such as Toronto that commercial buildings tend to be flooded out a lot too. Well, how should those be built and retrofitted? And as I mentioned before, that the importance of retaining and restoring natural infrastructure. But with our work with various organizations such as the Canadian Red Cross, what we've recognized is you can't give a 70-page report to a homeowner and say, here you go, this is how you reduce flood risk at the level of your home.
Right.
What we've recognized with our work with the Canadian Red Cross and other organizations is we have to put those resources, we have to distill them down into the simplest way possible. And so what we've done at the Intact Center is we've taken our research at the level of our home and we've actually distilled it down into a one-page infographic. So please, for any of you listening, go to the Intact Center website. Everything's freely available. Go to our Climate Ready Infographics tab and you can see what I'm talking about. But just as an example, in 3 easy steps on one page, we offer homeowners what they can do for limited time and cost to reduce their risk of flooding. We even break that up based on cost. What can a homeowner do for $0? Well, they can clean out east troughs and sweep leaves away from sewer grates. Under $250, putting window well coverings over window wells and extending downspouts. We want to get water away from the foundation of the home. For about $100, you can actually buy a flood alarm, which is a small device that you put on the floor in your basement. And if water gets into this device, a very loud alarm will sound. Being notified that there's water in your basement is incredibly important. We want to get that water out, or again, that sewage water out of the home as quickly as possible. The longer that water stays, the more damage and the more costly it becomes. More expensive upgrades and retrofits would include some pumps and backwater valves. So these are devices that stop water from coming in the home, or sewage water from coming in the home, or it gets that sewage water out of the home. Now, these are going to be more costly upgrades that do require expertise, such as a contractor, to be able to put those resources into place. But this is where our infographics come in handy. They educate a homeowner on what the risks are and what actions you should be taking. And then it actually complements what cities are doing in regards to subsidy programs. So I'd really want to acknowledge the City of Toronto here. Obviously, we're talking about the City of Toronto. They have a home flood subsidy program. And actually, just last week, Mayor Chow announced that they are increasing the amount of that subsidy program from $3,200 to just under $6,700, recognizing with inflation and the cost of living, but also that these risks are increasing, that they need to put resources and money into people's hands to be able to take action. So the Intact Center resources provide that information and knowledge for what homeowners can do. And then cities across Canada are also offering those subsidies to really support those actions, to get those actions put in place.
That's good to know as well. Obviously, when you're dealing with money issues, it's helpful if there's assistance to pay for any of those upgrades. Kathryn, when we're in a situation that does not feel immediate, I guess the question ultimately becomes, how do you tell if your home's at risk, whether you should go out there and take the steps to protect your home? Is there anything to think about if in quieter moments you want to figure out what it is you actually really need to do? How should people think about that?
Well, I think when we're talking about the climate change issue and extreme weather risk, taking proactive steps, we want to make sure we've taken those proactive steps before you actually end up with 3 feet of sewage water in your basement. I'd rather take those proactive steps first. We need to become more reactive, we need to become more proactive rather than reactive. We also know, and this is through many bodies of research, that for every dollar that we put into place will save us on average $2 to $10 of cost avoidance over a 10-year period. So by putting measures in at the level of the home, at the level of your community, your neighborhood, or across the larger city center, it is actually the more cost-effective strategy. And by having multiple players at play, providing information, so such as the Intact Center, getting information, freely available resources out to as many people as possible is incredibly important. We're seeing municipalities across Canada take actions to inform homeowners as well as major infrastructure projects that David was talking about. You're seeing the provincial government, such as the province of Ontario, specifically the Ministry of Emergency Management Ontario, they're recognizing their main mandate is what can we do after the event occurs? Well, they're now recognizing, well, we actually need to be more proactive and we need to be putting steps into place there. At the federal government, you have Environment and Climate Change Canada releasing the first ever national adaptation report. So now we actually have targets in regards to adaptation. You have entities such as, and you had mentioned, Jon, at the beginning, as the introduction, Intact Insurance. They have they Keep It Intact program, which provides customers and clients with information and resources on what actions they can be taking. So what we're seeing is multiple bodies are providing resources, information. We're in a very good place here in Canada. We know what to do to reduce extreme weather risk, but we just have to start putting those actions into place.
All right, really great perspective, Kathryn. And I also want to take a minute to introduce someone else who thinks a lot about all these matters as we continue into this What Homeowners Can Do section of this virtual event. You can see on your screen Paul Kovacs, who's the executive director for the Institute of Catastrophic Loss Reduction. He's also an adjunct research professor of economics at Western University. And Paul is Canada's leading authority on insurance and climate change. That's that wheelhouse subject, and has contributed to countless reports on risks tied to earthquakes, floods, and winds. And more importantly today, Paul, I know you've been thinking extensively about the issue of flooding, basement flooding. It's a subject you get asked about. We've already had some inquiries from people who are listening today about that matter. What can you tell the audience about the importance of being prepared and steps they might want to consider taking?
Hi, Jon. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. Go Jays, go. Sorry that I was late coming in. I was up late last night enjoying the game. Yeah. Thanks, Jon. Terrific excitement with the proactive steps that more people are thinking about doing to protect their homes from climate extremes. In this part of the country, the biggest focus is, as Kathryn was just touching on, is basement flooding. There are things that homeowners can do. There's things that the City of Toronto, Mississauga, Oakville, and others are doing right now at the community level. You put together the community action, the home actions, and we can take this issue and make a big difference. Last year, 100,000 homes in the Toronto area and Montreal area had water in their basement, and it typically costs, Kathryn, I'm sure touched on this, but something like $35,000 to clean it up. Nobody wants to go through that experience, but we had 100,000 people last year who did. And some of the things that a homeowner can do, Kathryn touched on. I mean, you put in a backwater valve and a sump pump with a backup power supply and landscape so things don't build up next to your home. You can take steps to help yourself while your community is actively upgrading the sewer system, making sure that the master plan for directing rainwater and other waters is managed well. So there's really exciting opportunities, a real strong consensus in the expert community about the right things to do. And another part I heard Kathryn touch on is community after community are stepping up saying, and we'll help you pay. Homeowner, you want to take action to protect yourself. We're very pleased with that. We would like you to do that, and we'll help cover the cost. And so not only did Toronto, did the mayor make an announcement just a few days ago, but most of the communities in the Toronto area have incentive programs. So the climate is changing. The biggest impact on this area has been really heavy rain that puts water in your basement, and there are things homeowners can do.
Okay, really helpful context and great to have you in the conversation, Paul. And we have so many questions from engaged listeners and viewers, and you guys are the experts. So I think we should dive right in and start fielding some of these questions. And just for those who are watching, I'm going through the queue. Thank you so much for submitting some of your inquiries. Guys, I'm going to let you decide who wants to take them as I go through these for now. But I'm going to start with a sort of a more macro question that came in from Jonathan, who noted the severity of the effects could keep getting worse unless we can take steps to reduce things like emissions. So asking sort of the broader question, how do we get politicians to seriously address this? Does anybody want to field that one?
I got to comment on everyone. So if Kathryn and David don't jump in fast enough, I'll throw something in.
Go for it.
Emissions reduction is incredibly important. We need to do all we can on that side. Canada is not where the other countries are, and it's not good to be behind on important issues like this. Emissions reduction will have an enormous potential impact on our climate, mainly in 50 or 100 years. Putting in a backwater valve will protect you today. And so both action to reduce emissions, we should be doing. But at the same time, act to protect yourself. You can protect your community. That's what Toronto Waterworks and others, Toronto Conservation Authority, we're working at a level to protect many people. And we have good programs in the Toronto area that are doing that, and we need more. But work also individually to protect your own home, look after yourself. Emissions reductions are really important, but it's not the complete solution. It's part of the solution.
Okay, that's great perspective. I want to get to another question from Srijit. And David, I'm going to have you field this one, if you don't mind, put you in the hot seat here. Extreme weather affects more than homes. How is Toronto addressing the impact on local wildlife and green spaces that also protect us from flooding and heat? An interesting question. How would you tackle that one?
How would I tackle that? Maybe one answer is science. The Conservation Authority, one of the things it does are watershed studies. So they update these every 10 years. And a lot of science goes into that. So we're looking for those indicators on changes in species that will show up in the rivers or invasive species that are showing up. And then coming out of those studies that we do, we give recommendations to try to mitigate or manage some of those effects. But we are seeing some of those effects. So, for example, the heat is quite evident, and we expect the water impacts to be there as well in the near future.
Kathryn, you were nodding your head there.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and to support everything that David said, we also have, at least here in Ontario, we're very lucky to have the Ontario Biodiversity Council. This is a council of member organizations, including the Toronto Region Conservation Authority. And with that, they produce many documents, including a strategy for biodiversity preservation across the province. But a really interesting live document, it's constantly being updated, is actually the State of the Ontario's Biodiversity Report. So for those of you interested, it's freely available. Please go to the Ontario Biodiversity website, and you'll actually see it's called SOBER is the acronym. And some of these indicators are actually being tracked across the province. We're OBC, Ontario Biodiversity Council, is known nationally and internationally for the work that they do in regards to tracking biodiversity.
Okay, definitely.
And John, the small part I would add, John, is again, these are not alternative ideas. And green infrastructure is an amazing way to look after basement flooding and other issues, in addition to putting in physical things like backwater valves. We have a lot of rain occasionally, and it's got to go somewhere. And if we plan that out, I mean, it doesn't always have to go through a sewer. And so why don't we put it into the right kind of wilderness area, upgraded greenlands, et cetera. Green infrastructure is part of the solution, actively being used throughout the Toronto area.
And there's so many.
No, sorry, go ahead, please. Yeah.
Just adding on to what Paul was saying, and there's so many co-benefits there. So as Paul was saying, the flood attenuation, heat attenuation when you're dealing with the urban heat island effect, carbon sequestration, biodiversity preservation, mental and physical health benefits. Like, we get so many co-benefits from nature. We really should be utilizing that as a tool in our toolkit.
Okay. Well, I think there's a nice segue to another question that we have. We kind of go from an sort of a macro green conversation to something more literally in one's backyard. Don had a question saying, I'm a professional gardener. I'd like to hear what you with homeowners would do with their gardens, i.e. rain gardens, tree planting. What are some of the simplest and cheapest things they can do, at least to get started, to make a difference?
Naturalize those spaces. You can rip up your cement driveway and put a naturalized driveway down. You could have native species gardens, so ensuring that there are native species within your local area. We want to ensure we're not planting invasive species, which could be a very big issue. There's plenty that we can do in naturalizing our gardens around our properties. So it's wonderful that people are interested in it, and there's a lot that can be done.
And John,
And I
the
would
small
add,
part I would do to build on that is there are many parts of the world, many parts of Canada where the problem is not enough water. I mean, they're really struggling not to have enough water. This part of the world, we have a lot of water. When it comes, it really comes. And so when you're thinking about your garden, when you're thinking about your home, where would you like that water to be? And plan for that and think about that. And most of us living in the Toronto area, these used to be farms, and the rain would fall and it would be absorbed. And Kathryn touched on, I mean, permeable surfaces. Let the water not build up on some paved surface and then race to some location it doesn't want to be in. Just allow the water to go in a natural way to something like your garden and be useful and be helpful. And think about having as much of that ability to cope with heavy water, because occasionally we have a lot of water in our part of the world, a real lot of water. And so where would you like it to be? Have it going into a rain barrel on a rainy day and you take it out on a dry day. I mean, the very basic things are part of a broader solution for how do you cope with water by not having it in your basement and causing damage and destruction.
yeah, and I could even just add really quickly, just as simple as your downspout and where you direct it. More water in your garden, even if you're not a great gardener, just doing that, moving that water a little bit further from your house already makes a big difference.
Exactly.
All right. David, I'm going to give the game ball back to you here just for a second. There's sort of a bigger picture question about municipalities and upgrades of infrastructure. This one came from Michael asking when municipalities do upgrade their infrastructure or create new infrastructure, saying stormwater is treated as a wastewater and is whisked away into the stormwater system, does not permeate into the soils. So are the municipalities contributing to increased flooding rather than mitigating it? Michael's question is, are municipalities unaware of some of these climate-related matters, I guess, when they're building new infrastructure? What are your thoughts on that?
My experience is they're very aware, and they are working really hard to try and integrate all these pieces into that landscape in the city. But sometimes it can be a challenge to fit it all in. So I think what I see is a fair amount of investment in adding elements that improve water quality, that slow down water. The question really is it enough? Well, it depends who you are. If you're living on the street that got those measures, you would say you got enough. If you're living on a street that didn't get those measures, you would say it's not enough. I think what we're seeing at the Conservation Authority, when we look at the watershed studies that we've done across time, is that the rate of change, the amount of water that's increasing in the watercourses has slowed. It's still increasing, and it increases because of urbanization. But we've made significant strides in improving that trend.
John, the one part I would add, very personally, I think the local governments absolutely know the right things to do, and they want to do it, and they're trying to do it. Taxpayers watch every penny, but some of us get to sit on the side and say, that's not enough. We need more money. The municipal governments know what to do to manage this problem better, and they're trying to do it. They just don't have enough resources. So next time there's a conversation and you see, you can drop by council. I've been to several councils the last little while and say, I support this one. This is one that does need more money. This would be really helpful. That's one way to get involved, that the municipal governments know what to do. They are spending a fair amount of money, but they need more, and it would be wisely spent if we can.
It's really important to put into perspective the actual cost of these projects compared to the cost of these extreme weather events. And David, correct me if I'm wrong, but part of that Portlands project, is it the Don River and Central Waterfront project? Is that all kind of parts and parcel together?
It's the same geography, different project managers, but it's the same geography.
Okay, well, correct me if I'm wrong, and I want to get some numbers here so people can kind of get a little familiar. But from what I understand, the Don River and Central Waterfront project, it was originally budgeted at $2.5 billion. I think it's currently budgeted at 3.7, and I think there's still about 10 or 15 years left to go. So my projections, it's probably going to end up around $5 billion. So to Paul's point, like these are very big budgets for these massive infrastructure projects. And people might be saying, that's a lot of money. Like, hey, I'll take $5 billion, no problem. But what we have to recognize is that sounds like a lot of money, but now let's put that into perspective when an extreme weather event happens. So last year in Toronto, when the major flood event occurred, we know from an insurance perspective, it was around $1 billion. I think it was 999 million. Let's round up to $1 billion. As I mentioned earlier, for every dollar of insured losses is approximately $3 to $4 of uninsured losses here in Canada. So that's 3 to 4 billion coming out of the pockets of individuals, businesses, and governments. So a one-day high precipitation event cost the city of Toronto $5 billion. Paul alluded to this, but a month later, 150 millimeters of rain fell. It just happened to fall over Montreal and the surrounding Quebec area. There were 70,000 insurance claims due to that flood event. The weather system could have been very different that day, and it could have been over Toronto again, and it could have cost another $5 billion. So personally, I want my city to be putting money towards jobs, so putting people to work. I want major infrastructure projects that are going to make my community more resilient. And we have to keep in mind, adaptation is the gift that keeps on giving. The moment we put the measure in place, it's going to protect us from the next $5 billion flood and the one after it and after it and after it. So putting into perspective these very big dollar figures, yes, but a one-day flood event costs the same amount of money. So I think that perspective is really important as well.
And John, I'd add in, but repeating Kathryn's note from earlier, you spend $1 and you probably save 5 to 10. These are municipal governments that know what to do, and they are trying to use our money really wisely. If they had more, they would do more to help us.
All right.
I think the other good news is when we look at not just Toronto, but Mississauga, Brampton, Vaughan, all the cities around us, they're also investing hundreds of millions of dollars into efforts in their communities to be more resilient against floods. So I think there is that message did get through that we need to do something, but it is a large problem.
Okay, we've got quite a few questions coming in, so we're going to try to get through as many as possible here. Maybe we'll move a little bit quicker in our home stretch. But David, I did want to come back. This came up a little bit earlier, but just to reiterate, because we did get a question from Renee about this, the hot spots, the areas in the Greater Toronto area that are most at risk, and the types of risks that are the highest. If people were to walk away from today to try to have the best understanding of that, what would sort of be the main way to think about that?
So it's a tremendously difficult question to answer because every house is different. Across time, people do upgrades. The city's done upgrades. Some places, not other places. So how do you make that an apples to apples comparison? It's tremendously difficult. So I come back to this more simple question of what would I do as I'm standing in my house? How would I try and understand that? So we have this one map on the screen here. Through the Conservation Authority, you can access riverine flood maps. And the red on here shows the 14 areas that are higher riverine risk in the city of Toronto. So if you live near one of those, you probably want to maybe look up a floodplain map and try and understand that better. But I think standing at your own house, regardless of where you are, not knowing how the sewers work, not knowing how other things work, I think you can look at, when was the last time I replaced my sump pump? Do I have a backflow valve? Is my lawn really wet, even under just a small storm event? What we want to do is get the water away from homes. And so if we see any of those symptoms around our house that aren't quite working right, maybe a window's too low or exposed, those are things we'd want to tackle, and those will reduce risk.
John, the small part I would add, if anybody listening to us lives in a home that has a basement, you're at risk. I mean, John, you were asking David where the hot spots. There's some places where the risk is higher. But if you have a home, you have a basement, and it rains sometime, you are at risk. and doing something about it would be smart.
Okay. On that note, because you mentioned it earlier, and it just came up with David as well, the sump pump. Susan had Susan had a question. She said, "I've never understood the benefit of a sump pump in an urban house. If the sewers are backing up, where are you pumping the water to?" So maybe a quick lesson there.
I'll invite David to come in. He's an engineer. I'll talk as an economist about why it comes in. But anyway, if you have water in your basement, you want it out as soon as you can. And if it hangs around, you start talking about mold, you talk about really serious problems. But another part of the sump pump proposal is the connection, the weeping towel connection to the municipal system that is very, very common for a lot of the homes in Canada, isn't needed anymore. You don't have to use weeping tiles to get the water away from your home during a heavy rain event. You use a sump pump and you spread it across at some distance from the building. But the short message is, once water's in the basement, you want it out as soon as you can. And having an automated system where you don't think about it, it just does it for you, that's a good thing.
And I would add, just for people to be relaxed when they see lots of water on the street, because better on the street than in your basement. And I know it looks bad, but the worst part is into the basement. So part of the solution is that the municipalities work on is trying to get that drainage towards sewers, towards streets, towards rivers. That gets it away from houses and basements.
Just a few simple upgrades to what Paul and David were speaking about. For your sump pump, you have a piping system that actually drops the water outside of your home, extending the downspout on that sump pump, making sure it's further away from the home. Because in some homes, when we've done at the Intact Center, done analysis around and inside homes, what we found is that there are some homes that actually, when the water gets pumped out, it's just dropping it right at the foundation of the home and then it ends up going back in. So extending the downspout of that sump pump and making sure your sump pump is working. There's very simple ways to clean that sump pump. Most people find out their sump pump isn't working when they have 3 feet of sewage water in their basement. So checking it on a biannual basis is incredibly important. You basically just take a toilet brush and clean it out. It takes about 10 minutes, making sure it's actually working.
I smile and nod, but my family would laugh at me if I was in charge of the sump pump. So that gets me to a question from Jane, who's just asking, are there experts perhaps that we can lean on, hire to assess changes? Are there beyond the resources online, are there people that you can perhaps turn to, which also invites a larger conversation around, how much, people have to spend on all of this. But, Kathryn, what would you say to that?
Well, I would say that municipalities across Canada and here in Ontario, Toronto, Burlington, Richmond Hill, they're doing a really great job recognizing, one, subsidies need to be offered, again, from that cost-effective perspective, but also that this is a trust factor. One, you're letting people into your homes. We need trusted sources. We need trusted contractors to be able to come into our homes and take these actions. And so cities, what I'm noticing is they're actually providing a list of trusted sources that people can contact and feel confident that the city has vetted them and that these are reliable people to come into your home to take these actions.
John, the small part I'd add, if there's anybody who's listening today that's not called a plumber at some point, good for you. I keep having problems. I need somebody to come in and help me out. And anyway, these experts are delighted to give you also advice about things like water in your basement, even if in my case, I just can't get the kitchen sink to turn on properly. So there are plumbers who are readily available. There's lots of them and they know what they're doing and they give advice. And the other huge one is more and more municipalities. You call a municipality and they're delighted to help and share their thoughts and their expertise. In some communities, it's very formalized. Please come to my house. Other places, you just chat on the phone, and the experts are often at the municipal level and wanting to help.
All right, we're almost out of time. We have a couple more questions. I think we can get through them if we go a little rapid fire here. Kathryn, I'll just come back to you because you did talk about the insurance considerations, and Srijit, who asked a question earlier, had another one. How can homeowners get insured if they're living in a flood-prone area? What's how is that evolving right now? What should people think about? How to tackle that question for term?
Well, I think recognizing that this is an issue and speaking with your insurance broker is probably the best bet. So, one, understanding what your insurance does cover, having your broker explain all of that to you. If you currently aren't paying for flood insurance, how can you get that added on? What is the cost associated with it? So, every carrier, every person, every location is going to be different. But I really think just that knowledge sharing and recognizing this is an issue and then having those conversations and what that means for every individual homeowner is really important.
Okay. And David, over to you again. Anne was just wondering about how a municipality or those on the ground in a community that are dealing with some of these issues, how does that get managed at a government level when perhaps policies at other parts of the government, maybe in the provincial case, have different perspectives on conservation authority? What's that like? What's that process like? Especially since we started the conversation by talking about housing's an issue, having enough housing, having enough development. All these things are happening simultaneously.
Yeah, so there's quite a layered approach in terms of how government manages it. But I think as a resident, the first point of contact is the city. It's the city that is managing the street, managing all components of the city, but they also manage emergency services. So when that extreme event happens, it's coordinated by the city, those emergency services that will come out to help people. Conservation authorities, we provide technical advice to that process. We provide warning advice to that process. But you do need someone to lead, and it is the cities quite often that are leading. So it's been my perspective that, sometimes two people don't get along, but the governments do have quite a good system of tackling this. But there is a resource challenge.
Great. Well, this has been such a dynamic conversation. It's been great to talk to such all-stars right up there with the Blue Jays. A lot of learnings and a lot of things to think about as well. Kathryn Bakos, David Kellershohn, Paul Kovacs, thank you so much for being part of a very informative climate change virtual event today. It's been great to have you with us.
Thank you for having
Thanks,
us.
Jon.
Thank you.
Our thanks again to Kathryn and David and Paul. A big thanks to our sponsor for today's event, Intac. We are grateful for their support. A big thanks to everybody at the Toronto Star who made this event happen. Duncan Hood, who covers this area so extensively in his own reporting and does a great service to all Toronto Star readers. Thanks to Grant Ellis, Jen Gately, and the events team for putting together this helpful conversation. And most importantly, thank you for listening, for watching, for asking questions. We appreciate your participation today, and we hope to do it again soon. So thanks again. Have a great afternoon. Go Jays.